notice that the second panel, six. You'll notice that the second panel has been canceled, and we'll have to reschedule them. I just urge colleagues, take note, colleagues, that a lot of people are watching this study because it is an incredibly important study, and the current situation with procurement can't continue. I think there's a unanimous agreement on that. So with that, let's get ourselves started. This time we'll still go very quickly, but I'm going to try and run it right till 6 o'clock. Should be able to get in 2 full rounds and maybe a bit more. With that, I want to call on Mr. Mueller and Madame Sian Ferrani. Got it close? Sian Ferrani, okay. I think we had quite a time trying to pronounce your name last time. Mr. Mueller is the President and CEO of Aerospace Industries Association, and Madame Sian Ferrani is President and CEO of Canadian Association of Defence and Securities Industries. You each have 5 minutes. Mr. Mueller, you are listed as first on the order paper, so we'll hear from you first. 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. The Aerospace Industries Association of Canada represents more than 90% of the Canadian aerospace industry, including the defence sector. And I want to thank the committee for this study, as it is of critical importance to our nation's defence and innovation potential, and is truly a nonpartisan issue. Canada's aerospace industry, as you know, is a key contributor to our national and local economies from coast to coast. Our call for an industrial strategy and a greater investment in the industry will create the kind of business environment in this country that encourages investment, which will create high-value jobs. We also feel an industrial strategy will help fix the current export permit system that is a significant frustration for many of our members. Procurement should be about better collaboration between government and industry. It should be about positioning Canada and our industry for the work, innovation, and defence requirements of the future. It needs to be about creating more opportunities, and it needs to be about better planning. It is our hope your work in this committee will result in this government or future governments creating a framework that commits to the establishment of an industrial strategy. Internationally, we are seeing our friends and competitors have different relationships between industry and government. We require the same forethought here. Members of the committee, in the past, decision makers like yourself made aerospace and defence a priority, and we need that same leadership and vision today. In fact, the NATO Secretary General put it very clearly last week: there is no defence without industry. This is not a partisan issue. Rather, threats to continental and world security are more complex and multifaceted than they have ever been, and the strategic environment requires a comprehensive approach. This is why industry is eagerly awaiting the promised defence policy update. We are also looking for a clear commitment through the defence policy update on how the government will be achieving our commitments to multinational organizations like NATO. We do believe that there needs to be more investment to both provide the necessary equipment and also speed up procurement. Today's procurement system is burdensome, complex, and lengthy. It must be transformed into one that is efficient and strategic. In order to succeed and to ensure we have domestic capability and capacity, we need a procurement system that operates effectively and efficiently, capable of responding to rapidly evolving international security threats and emerging capability requirements. This moment presents a unique opportunity for intensified collaboration between the government and industry to refine our procurement approaches and processes. If we fail to engage in early collaboration, Canada risks missing out on opportunities to leverage our innovation and industrial strengths to meet our growing defence and security needs. To address these challenges and seize the opportunities, I want to give some ideas that the government should be considering. First, we need to build stronger strategic relationships with industry through ongoing and sustained engagement. The federal government and industry should collaboratively develop a strategic relationship through more meaningful and sustained engagement practices. Second, we need to better align requirements with needs. We need to work together to develop requirements to ensure capability relevance for current and future needs. Third, tailoring procurement approaches to the nature of the acquisition. Match the approach with the nature of the acquisition, adapting when necessary to ensure an appropriate fit. The determination of this will require strategy and advanced discussions so there is clarity and transparency. Fourth, we should consider adopting a risk-based procurement approach. Work should be done to increase the use of risk-based contract approvals to streamline defense procurement and reduce unnecessary process requirements. And fifth, we need to work together to enhance government procurement capacity through collaborative training and skills development. We need a new relationship between the federal government and industry to enhance procurement capacity. We need to develop mechanisms for sharing skills, talent, and risk management approaches. And this goes to some of the cultural changes that are required that you've been hearing from. In conclusion, many of these recommendations would be addressed through a comprehensive aerospace industrial strategy that would provide certainty, transparency, and the identification of key industrial capabilities and capacities that we need here in Canada. Getting this right and optimizing defense procurement is essential for our nation's security and innovation potential. And together we can harness innovation and maintain control over our defense capabilities and ensure Canada, in fact, remains strong, secure, and engaged. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Madame Cianfrani.
Thank you for inviting me to speak to you today about procurement and the Canadian Armed Forces. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has upset the long-standing security balance and architecture that Canada has invested in and which serves as a cornerstone of our national security. No NATO government, military, or defense company was prepared for the event or the grinding conventional ground war that has followed. NATO states, including Canada, will need to supply munitions and defense technologies quickly, likely for years, in quantities not foreseen or planned for since World War II. At Vilnius, NATO leaders reaffirmed a three-pronged defense investment pledge, the 3 Cs it's called. The famous or infamous 2% of GDP floor is one. To spend 20% of capital on capital equipment and R&D is another. Canada has failed to meet both targets since their launch in 2014 and has never set out a plan to meet them. NATO also wants and needs its member states and their defense industries to be a part of the effort to arm Ukraine and replenish their own stockpiles, and a new defense production action plan has been put in place for that purpose. For the last 18 months, the global demand for defense industrial production has increased significantly. The commitments I've just mentioned will amplify what we're seeing. The global defense industry will be shaped for years to come. This is a moment when we have not seen in decades for Canada to step forward and make generational investments in its own capabilities to share in the collective burden. It's time to step up or step aside. Failure doesn't look like getting kicked out of NATO or G7. Failure looks like AUKUS, being ghosted by our closest allies. It looks like not expanding our munitions program, production capacity in time to help Ukraine. It looks like holding on to old kit instead of donating it because it takes us too long to replace it, which brings me to the subject at hand, Canadian defense procurement and how to reform the system. I've appeared in front of parliamentary committees before. I have said that there are no silver bullets. I do not believe that seemingly simple, elegant proposals will reform one of the most difficult and complex functions of public administration, and I've said that a single agency is no panacea. Meaningful reform will require laborious, painstaking, incremental cooperative work by the departments involved, and Canadian industry needs a seat at that table. The work begins with mapping the acquisition process and eliminating bottlenecks, because currently there is little to no objective process performance data, at least not in the public domain. We've consulted and urged officials to move away from a one-size-fits-all model, especially for rapid technology adoption and services. If it's Canadian and a key industrial capability, use a national security exception. I've participated in reforms to identify KICs which were meant to favor and expedite acquisition in these areas. The hard truth is that our defense procurement produces the outcome our country wants, not the ones we pretend to collectively want. The rigid, risk-averse gyrations we see are reflections of a lack of priority at the national level. The current approach also undermines the capabilities, effectiveness, and readiness of the CAF. Morale and the public image of the forces suffers, affecting recruitment and retention, arguably the biggest issue facing the Canadian Armed Forces today. Defense procurement is an instrument of foreign policy, industrial policy, and national security. If we were clear on what we wanted, we would drive the outcomes accordingly. The Prime Minister needs to identify defense procurement reform as a priority and then hold ministers accountable for improvements. Lastly, we need to start thinking about our defense industry like our allies do, namely as a fundamental component of national security and a collective tool of deterrence. To this end, procurement system outcomes need to develop and sustain a healthy Canadian industrial base. The neglect faced by the domestic industry must be replaced by a new approach and commitment to industry if we're going to be a meaningful contributor to Ukraine, NATO, our allies, and to ensure we have a stake in the economic opportunities that present themselves. This was our main point in our submission to the Defence Policy Update. We've known for decades that Canadian defence procurement is slow. So what has changed? The world has changed, and the status quo is now a real risk to Canada's national security and to that of our NATO allies. Thank you.
Thank you. Over the last couple of meetings, I've asked a number of questions about the production of 155 millimeter shells. Ms. Cianfrani, I don't know if you heard the testimony that came up here, but we had the suggestion been made at this table that it's industry that is not ramping up or investing in production, and that there aren't long-term contracts available, despite 155 shells being in demand, not just to replenish our own supplies, not just to supply Ukraine, but by all other allied militaries. Can you? What can industry do to get shell production increased in Canada?
Industry is expecting to see demand signals which are firm, binding, signed contracts. These investments in production lines to ramp up will take capital investments that repay themselves in the order of 15 to 20 years. Which means that they need to be backstopped by a procurement size that is large enough to effectively run the line for that long of a period of time in order for them to recuperate their investment. That's first and foremost. So signed, legally binding contracts.
So a year and a half into the conflict in Ukraine, and shell production has not gone up at all in Canada. We're the same as we were before. General Eyre it was very concerned about this and sounded the alarm. So why can't this happen? Is it a matter of the government making this a priority and putting the contracts out, or what will it take?
As I understand it, proposals have been put to the Government of Canada. I have not seen these proposals, but I do understand from companies proposals have been put into the Government of Canada to increase shell production, to modify the lines, particularly for 155s. And to my knowledge, and you would have to ask the company to confirm this, but to my knowledge, there have been no legally signed contracts to increase production so that we can deliver to Ukraine.
So industry is waiting for the government?
Of course it is.
Okay, thank you. On the, you had said that the exclusion of Canada from AUKUS is a symptom of the failure of Canada to take its national defense and its procurement as well seriously. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it's an example of how Canada doesn't seem to be, I think, reading the tea leaves correctly. We went into AUKUS, as I understand it, expecting, or in the words of the Prime Minister, that this is a submarine deal. Not understanding that allies speak through defense cooperation agreements, so that this is more than just a purchase of submarines. There is a whole technology stream going on behind this where the three nations will collaborate, the Brits, the UK, and the US will collaborate to produce emerging technologies much beyond a submarine deal.
And share intelligence amongst themselves without Canada being a part of it.
Well, we're not at the table.
Right. You said that eliminating bottlenecks is part of the key to fixing procurement. Can you identify some of those bottlenecks?
Well, first and foremost, we need to, before I go into hypothetical bottlenecks, we would need to map the system. Right now, there exists no mapping of the procurement system in the public domain anyway, which means that we cannot identify where there are bottlenecks, misalignments, or perhaps duplications to make determinations on how we would change that process.
So industry doesn't know how to best go about putting together a bid or a proposal because they don't even understand.
Well, no, we understand in general how the system works,
Yeah.
but if you actually want to do the hard work of eliminating steps which make this overall process highly complicated, you would have to take, for example, you would have to be able to have exposure to, I don't know, the 250 some steps that the Department of National Defense goes through to get a project from project conception, requirements analysis, options analysis, and then through to actual procurement. We have no visibility into those things, so we can't conjecture as to how the system might be repaired or not.
Okay, and is it only when the Prime Minister makes this a priority will this happen? You talked about the importance of the Prime Minister. Is it the weight of the Prime Minister's office is just not behind?
We would expect to see
procurement?
something like this in mandate letters, and we would expect it to be very directive to the ministers in charge. There are effectively 3 ministers, but a few more that play within defense procurement and export, if you want. We would expect to see it in all of the 3 minister mandate letters to take action to reduce or to take action to have procurement reform, which maybe they need to go a little bit further to say meaningful procurement reform that reduces the number of steps and time that it takes from acquisition to from conception to acquisition.
Okay, so the actual goal there to reduce times is not stated in any of the as a priority by the government.
Not as far as I know.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Kelly. Madame Lambropoulos, 6 minutes, please.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses. Mr. Mueller, you spoke a little bit about how we need to refine the procurement process, and I'm wondering if you can specify a little bit more the ways in which we can do that, and if you can let us know what is most time-consuming and what's most burdensome in our procurement process.
Well, thank you for the question. And one of the main things I spoke about at the beginning at my remarks is the need for an industrial strategy for defense and aerospace. And it goes to many of the things that were spoken about here before. Industry thrives on predictability. Industry thrives on transparency. Industry thrives on having an understanding of what and where the government wants to invest, where the government sees the key capacities and capabilities that are there. So that, to me, is fundamental right from the beginning. We need that long-term industrial strategy. And if we can get those ingredients right, industry will respond and be up for the challenge on these things. A few of the very specific pieces that I keep hearing from industry is greater collaboration between the government and industry when you are defining out capabilities that are required, when you are putting together requests for information. And I listened in attention to some of the other testimonies that you had here also. And that, to me, is a key theme. The more you can have discussions with industry earlier on in the process, industry can respond. But not only that, industry can propose new solutions, new ideas. We have disruptive technologies happening right across the board, and we seem to be always late to the game here. The other piece that I see is a huge challenge is there's a risk aversion with government on moving forward on some of these key procurements. And we need to remove some of that risk. And the old adage is fail fast, fail quickly. And that needs to be ingrained into the procurement system. There's a lot of questions back and forth, and you keep hearing from industry in particular. When you're in other countries, the procurement process and the request for information is like this, and then in Canada, it's out the door. So there needs to be some specific pieces that are happening there. But in my mind, overall, fundamentally, it's that need for that industrial strategy, having the government come out with a clear policy, a clear industrial strategy that will address a lot of the issues right across the board that we're seeing.
Thank you very much. And do you mind commenting on whether or not you think there are situations in which it's appropriate to use non-competitive contracting instead of competitive contracting? And what do you think are the pros and cons of doing so?
Well, I think that's on a case-by-case basis. And again, you need that strategy, that industrial strategy, the policy from the government to clearly define what are the key capabilities we want to have here in the country, what's the capacity we need to have, what makes the most sense. So in the absence of that, again, we're going on a transactional basis when we're recapitalizing the armed forces. And that's a huge challenge. We need to do that heavy lifting, that hard work beforehand to have that industrial strategy, to sit down government, industry, and have those discussions on where we can be best suited to support the government. And once you have that industrial strategy, those decisions on where does that procurement fit in and how can we best do it would be informed by the strategy. So have these discussions earlier, have them with industry, and that'll inform the plan moving forward.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Sanfrani, would you like to comment on that last question as well, versus on foregoing competition in certain circumstances, and what you think, what circumstances you would think that would be appropriate in?
Sure thing. Mike is very right to say that it starts off with identifying and prioritizing what we want in this country from a security and capability perspective. And then what you do is you drive that into the outcomes you want in your procurement model. So it means we want an outcome of maintaining a certain capability with a Canadian vendor, right? We want a domestic supply of X. And then you would structure your procurement. In that case, that might be acceptable to have a sole source. You might use a national security exception for that, or you may use a clause that we have that's called not in the public interest. It's the same thing, but you may choose to sole source that because it is not in the public interest, in your national interest, to procure that in a competitive way. But you need to understand the outcome that you want first, and then you use the tools to get the desired outcome that you want.
I have less than a minute, so I appreciate the fact that you guys have come to talk to us about the need for industry and government to work together in order to come up with these plans and to better fit the needs that we have and keep going. I heard a lot of people testify the same thing, and I think that we're going to see it in our report and in our recommendations. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Madame Mignola, bienvenue au comité. 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Welcome to the committee. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mueller, I must confess that the aerospace situation is disturbing. We have things that are being replaced without bids, the radar system that has to be improved upon, the Kingfishers that are not flying, the F-35s, whose contracts seem to favor the Americans and less so Quebec and Canadian industries. But let me focus on the replacement of the CP-45 Aurora. I would like to find out what you think about the fact that the contracts are granted to Boeing without bids and the impact this could have on the industries of Quebec and Canada. The fact that Boeing is allowed to have the contract instead of the contract going to a Canadian company.
Well, I don't want to comment on a specific act of procurement, just because we do have members on both sides of these issues. But again, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record here. It goes back to the need for an aerospace strategy in Canada. To have these types of conversations 5 years ago, to have the government clearly come out with a defined set of priorities, capability, capacity that they want to build here in Canada. And really that strategy would then inform the path forward. There's pros and cons on both sides of the issue here that we find ourselves in, but that need for a long-term strategy, absolutely critical. And the government needs to come to the table, start to have these types of conversations so we don't end up in situations where it's uncertain as to what's going on. So if you had that long-term strategy, if you had the key capabilities defined out from the government, from the Canadian Armed Forces, you could have these discussions earlier. So that to me is the core of the basis for all the procurement problems and potential different paths forward on some of these things.
Si je me trompe pas,
If I'm not mistaken, when we talk about strategic planning, cyclical planning, we must also think of the time when the last plane was put to use. We have to start thinking about the last time the fleet was replaced. Am I mistaken?
Yeah, I would say we're recapitalizing the Air Force on a case-by-case basis, on a transactional approach right now. And without that long-term strategy that's in place, we're going to keep going through this process of a transactional approach. And that's one of the recommendations we've made in advance of the defense policy update coming forward, having the government provide funding, have the government provide that long-term plan. Again, industry right across the country, supply chains on all sides depend on predictability, transparency, and where we're going to go next. So again, that long-term industrial strategy is absolutely key. And we see other countries doing it. The Australians, as an example, defense policy update, substantive, identifies where they're going as a country, identifying the investments, and then also straight from the top, from the Prime Minister down, a commitment for a long-term industrial strategy. How do you utilize the industrial base? And we have much to be proud of here in Canada with respect to aerospace. We're one of the very few countries that can design a plane from start to finish, and it's something we should be incredibly proud of.
merci.
Thank you. Ms. Chan Farani, during your remarks, you talked about our ammunition needs and Canada's delays. As far as I know, Canada has ammunition factories. Weapons were sent to Ukraine, and I understand that ammunition did not go along with the weapons. But is it possible to catch up when it comes to this delay? And if an ally were to go through a situation similar to the one we have in Ukraine, what can be done so that these errors are not repeated, if there are any errors whatsoever?
So I think you heard from the Chief of Defense Staff that that yes, they haven't increased munitions through the munitions supply program since I think 2022, or they haven't purchased additional munitions through that program. So we were basically using stocks in order to send our contributions to Ukraine. Right now, around the world, the countries are getting together and they are looking at how to pool their munitions in order to get rapid production of munitions. In fact, NATO announced last week that it is providing frame contracts and firm orders for about $1.5 billion worth of ammunition. And they will continue to do that. Countries around the world are bringing their defense production, their industry arm. Anywhere from 30 to 40 companies have been showing up at a run rate in order to be able to look at how they can ramp up their ammunition to answer the call from Ukraine. To my knowledge, Canada at this time is absent from those conversations. If we want to be present at those conversations, we would need to start talking with our ammunition providers, which the United States is doing, by the way. The United States has actually given Canadian firms contracts to increase ammunition for their own purposes and for their donations to the Ukraine. So we would need to start having those conversations, and it would probably take some time, approximately 2 years before we would be in a state, I would guess, that's my guess, before we would be in a state to even be producing additional operational rounds. However,
We're going to have to leave that answer there.
Sure.
Thank you. Ms. Matheson, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Mueller, your organization produced a report entitled Vision 2025, which called specifically for the Buy in Canada policy, procurement policy. So it's something that I've been pushing. I have a private member's bill on that, C-300, which looks to establish that Made in Canada procurement policy. Of course, we want to ensure that we're using those federal dollars to create good community building, family sustaining jobs in Canada. So can you elaborate on that specific Made in Canada approach that you outlined in your policy document? And actually, I was hoping that you would be able to or be willing to table that report with the committee here today as well.
Absolutely would be willing to table that report, and thanks for the question. I believe that report came out just before the pandemic, and there is a section there on defence procurement, and it's buy for the benefit of Canada, and that's an important distinction on that side of things. We have workers right across the country, just over 200,000 workers in aerospace, and as you mentioned, good family supporting jobs, absolutely 30 to 40% higher than the average manufacturing across the board. And our challenge at the time, and still is, to the Canadian government, in the context of a defence policy update, in the context of a long-term industrial strategy, you need to be buying for the benefit of Canada, for the workers of Canada. There's supply chains right across the country. We see some pretty significant investments, both by Canadian companies and then also international companies in that workforce right across the country. And that spans right from Vancouver Island right out to Newfoundland and everywhere in between. And one of the amazing things is that you will find aerospace companies in almost every riding in the country, everywhere. Good family supporting jobs, as you had said. So critically important. But again, it's the need for that industrial strategy, and we've been encouraging the government for years now to come forward with that strategy, to identify what are the key capabilities, what is the capacity we need to have here in the country, and then through the procurement, yes, buy for the benefit of Canada, buy for the benefit of the Canadian workers, for the innovation, technological. How do you drive forward some of the research and development domestically in the country? So a whole host of pieces out there. But again, that strategy is absolutely critical, and I want to thank a lot of the other House of Commons committees that have specifically called for the implementation of the strategy, and it's my hope that that is one of the recommendations that come out of this report from this committee.
Thank you. So, I mean, we're kind of, I see a bit of a, and I hope that it isn't a contradiction, and maybe that there can be a bit more clarity from both witnesses on this, because Ms. Farani, oh, I was promising myself I would get that well. Farani, okay, that streamlining that we're talking about, that need, that immediate need, because things have been so delayed in terms of procurement bids and so on, that streamlining seems to almost work against this idea, because that long-term planning hasn't happened, because that long-term strategy isn't there. So can you both talk about how you see them fitting together better, so that we're not just buying off the shelf, we're not just spending a lot of money on something like an F-35, which is now ballooning in the American system. They're already showing how much more trillions of dollars they're pouring into it for a system that isn't Canadian made, isn't part of that longer vision in that strategy.
Sure. You want to take it, or you want?
Well, maybe I could just start with that. It's not really a contradiction. You need to put that work in to define exactly where you want to go as a country with respect to defense policy. And the government thus far has been lacking in that. And that's really what's required here. And in some cases, buying off the shelf makes sense. In some cases, developmental programs make sense. But without that piece there to guide industry to help government make those decisions, it's very, very, very tough.
But if you're not investing now for that later term and you're spending all your money on that buy on the shelf, how can you invest now?
I think there are some areas which I would call quick hits or low-hanging fruit, where we know that we have resident capability within the country. And in the case of the war in Ukraine, we would need to restock, for example. So things like we have a lot of armored vehicles. We're world leaders in armored vehicles. So that would be identification of one capability that we know is resident in Canada, that if we were needed to source that very quickly, we could source it. And we know that that is going to be a capability that we're going to need for the long haul. Another example would be something like cyber, for example, where you have a lot of nationalistic interest. We know that it evolves rapidly. We know that there are people in this country that do it. So if you wanted to procure it as like a service, you would set up a long-term sourcing contract with the vendor that's in Canada, and you would move forward on those things. I think it's sort of a double-pronged approach, where you continue on with your strategy on one side because it's a very long-term item. And in the short term, you look at where do we already know we want to keep capability in this country, where it's world leading already, and make the investment in the quick hit in that area.
Thank you, Ms. Manson. Second round, 5 minutes. Ms. Gallant.
Ms. Mueller, it took 20 years after the cancellation of the first Sea King replacement order to get the helicopters in place, the Cyclones. So given that it took that long and that the Griffins, the CH-146s, are due to be replaced in the 2030s, should we not be placing that order now?
Well, maybe I'll give a bit of an example on this, because again, it goes to your question and then also the previous question with respect to, isn't there a bit of a disconnect here on some of these things? But when the government puts in timelines, puts in key capacity, key capabilities, and puts in the funding, as we saw through the COVID-19 example, industry can do amazing things. And it's incumbent upon the government to set forward those priorities, absolutely.
Is there an order in place yet? Yes or no, to the best of your knowledge?
I won't talk about specific procurements.
Okay, and with that, would it be an idea to have these key procurements put in the mandate letters of the ministers? Maybe that's what they're waiting to release.
I would say so. We're eagerly awaiting the defense policy update, and again, a clear signal from the government on funding, timelines, capacity, and capability, and then also for that industrial strategy. Absolutely key.
And Mr. Mueller, you were around here when we acquired the Chinooks and the C-130s, as well as the Globemasters. We got those in record time. What is it that we didn't do then that we are doing now, or vice versa? How did we get those so quickly when we needed them, yet it just drags on seemingly now?
Well, I think what's not happening now is we haven't identified the capacity. We haven't identified the capability. We have, in some respects, identified the budget and then the timelines. We need those ingredients all to come together, and then industry can respond in phenomenal ways. Again, I look at the COVID-19 pandemic. We had aerospace companies who had never made a ventilator before. The government gave those ingredients, and within a few months, we had ventilators. So industry can respond if that plan is in place, and it doesn't need to take a long time.
So to both of you, were you or your representatives of industry consulted on NORAD modernization needs? Were either of you consulted before the orders went in?
Not that I can recall.
We have had a very top-level briefing on some of the technology planks under NORAD modernization, but at this point, we have not been involved in the actual planning and preparations for the equipment that's going to be purchased for NORAD mod. Some of our companies may have been involved in some of the procurements of the North Warning systems, but you have to speak to them directly.
So-
Certainly, we have not at the association level been given a big plan for all the rollout for NORAD mod.
But again, you have $38 billion, huge opportunities for Canadian industry, and we need support from the government to identify those opportunities to be able to chase them.
Okay, Ms. Sian Farani, we have 4 submarines in our Navy fleet, one of which we're lucky to have at sea at any given point in time. Are you aware of any actual procurements in place? Are they even looking for a replacement?
I can't speak to the operational needs of the Canadian Armed Forces. I am aware I understand, because I have not seen a copy of the Defense Policy Update, but I understand that this asset may be discussed in the Defense Policy Update. But I have not seen, I've not actually seen it.
So it has to be in a policy paper when it's pretty obvious to most of us that we need a submarine replacement. We've had testimony before this committee saying that we already have Chinese in the Arctic, and of course there's the Russian threat, our next closest neighbor. Now, 2 weeks ago, Major General Paul Prevost told the committee that industry needs to recognize there's a global market for this here. We're working with industry now. Would you be able to comment on what's holding up the process for NORAD replacement?
For NORAD mod?
Yeah.
I have no idea what's holding up NORAD mod. I'm not in the conversations. If they're sourcing something from Canadian firms, I'm most certainly not involved in those discussions.
Okay, so a general error. Okay. Okay, that's it?
That's it.
Okay.
Mr. Fisher, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both of our witnesses for being here. Mr. Mueller, you're in the aerospace business, and as you know and I know, Dartmouth Cole Harbour's got a pretty strong aerospace sector. So it's great to have you here, both of us being huge supporters of that sector. At this committee, in the conversation generally, very often we talk about interoperability, specifically in the NATO context. Ms. Matheson touched on buying off the shelf or buying existing platforms from our allies. I wonder if you could sort of specify to us what steps that we can take to ensure that the Canadian industrial base is integrated in these supply chains so that interoperability also supports the Canadian industry and its workers.
Well, interoperability is obviously a key requirement from the armed forces, which is there. And I should say some great aerospace companies outside of Halifax too, which are proud members of ours, and just doing some phenomenal work out there. But again, it goes back to identification through a strategy with respect to the interoperability piece, the benefits to Canada piece right across the board, and it's advanced conversations with the industry based in Canada on where the benefits would be on a lot of these procurements. And we need to do that more often. We need to do that earlier to identify a lot of these pieces that are out there. And I would say there's a huge opportunity there. You talk about NORAD modernization, the integration of the supply chain. Again, mapping it out through an industrial strategy, having government be champions for our industry in Canada to take advantage of those opportunities that are out there to ensure interoperability, to ensure the good paying jobs are coming to Canada, absolutely critical.
Thank you for that. You, in your opening statement, I think it was your opening statement, you talked about moving towards more of a risk-based approach. I had the opportunity to ask our last panel, I guess it was last Thursday, about a risk-based approach. Does your vision of moving more towards that approach include litigation? Because some countries we've heard sort of see litigation as a cost of doing business, and they almost factored into their costs or into their procurement. And Canada, I guess, does that to much of a less extent, or risk averse. Were you thinking of litigation as well when you talked about moving more to a risk-based approach?
No, I'm not sure litigation benefits any of the parties built into the system. No, the risk, reducing the risk or identifying the risk to some of the procurements would be to reduce the complexity, say for a certain procurement. Do we need to have the 300-page, application or a 1,000-page application? Is there certain things that we can take out of it, reduce the complexity because the risk isn't there, depending on the procurement? So, really, it's analysis of each procurement as they come out. What do we need to have? Where is the risk? Can it be managed? As opposed to having a one-size-fits-all approach for everything, which takes everything to the greatest common denominator, as opposed to lowering the thresholds, reducing some of the complexity in order to get some of these things through.
So you use the term nature of the acquisition. You want or you think that the procurement system should be designed to reflect the nature of the acquisition?
Absolutely. It depends on...
So a 300-page application form for F-35s or for something that's major, but...
It may be appropriate, absolutely, depending on the nature of the acquisition, but when it's smaller in nature, there's not as, a simple maintenance contract as opposed to the overall purchase of a particular product. You would take a look at it and then reduce down what would need to be reduced. Again, this would have to be discussed, and again goes back to that need for that overarching industrial strategy. So not reducing all the risk, but taking a look in an informed approach, working with industry, reducing some of the complexity that's there.
If you had, do I have time? 20 seconds? Okay. I'll hand it
Give
back
up
to
because
Ms.
you're a
Matheson. She likes the
finance.
extra seconds.
Yes. Very good of you to do that. And thank you for that plug from the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. Ms. Vignola, 2.5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much. Mr. Mueller, you talked about the astronomical volume of documents that industry has to fill out to be able to obtain a contract. I would particularly like to tell us in less than 45 seconds about technology, the technology used for procurement to submit your contracts, to obtain information. Is that technology user-friendly for businesses, be they small or big industries?
Thank you for the question, and I'm not the subject matter expert on that because I don't live the procurements every day, but from what I hear from industry across the board, the complexity is high, and the back and forth that is required to put forward an application is very high and time consuming, and this back and forth of questions, back and forth between government and industry. And that's why one of the recommendations we've made is greater transparency between industry and government, and also greater, why can't we have industry spending time in government, government spending time in industry as an example, in order to foster understanding between the requirements? Because often government will come to industry and ask for something, perhaps not realizing the amount of work and time would go into that particular question. So I think greater understanding, greater collaboration is absolutely required.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chian Farani. Let me come back to ammunition. Some of our soldiers have never even fired any 94 millimeter ammunition. They have difficulty obtaining ammunition for their own practice on the practice fields here. How can we make sure henceforth that our soldiers, those we want to help, have enough ammunition so that they can have the most effective training as possible?
That time has expired, so have to work it in some other way. Ms. Matheson, 2.5 minutes. 2.5.
Plus the 20 seconds for Mr. Fisher, right?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
He didn't notarize the donation.
I just want to ask, in terms of these streamlining ideas and paperwork requirements and long-term industrial strategies, can you both talk about how the fact that there's a 30% vacancy rate within procurement and defense, and how that's impacting that, and maybe with the additional time, can we have from both of you as well what you've heard from your members? I know that there's been a delay in the updated defense policy. We spoke about it with the minister last week. I know that many of us thought that it would happen before the summer break, but if you could talk about what you've heard from both your members on that as well.
Talk to the last one, for sure. I think it's just members are obviously worried, and that it hasn't been released. It is, let's call it a rallying document for us, where we get a little bit more visibility on the direction that the armed forces is going. We also understand that there are, I think, some improvements expected, or structural improvements to procurement within, so some concepts or ideas that we've been working on with the Department of National Defense and PSPC. So we're eager for it to come out. I think we are also disappointed that it has not come out already. And it also gives us a good view sometimes on the assets that the Canadian Forces is looking to procure. For example, if they are going to, be interested in submarines or drones or whatever, we get a good view on that. So yeah, and if it has come on the heels, or if it comes on the heels of some budget reductions, I think that we would wonder how those two interplay as well.
I think there's an opportunity for Canada to show leadership, and we're looking to that DPU release to show that leadership that's there. I think it's an opportunity to step up, an opportunity to do more rather than less, and that would impact on the procurement side also. Very concerned about the talk of cuts in the context of the situation in the world right now, and I think we're waiting to see how that may impact procurement side of things and where we're going as a country.
And 5 minutes.
Okay.
5 minutes.
Start it over because I didn't hear you. I want to thank both our witnesses for being here. Just want to keep on this track of DPU. How disappointing is it that the government hasn't come forward with it? They're at least 6 months behind on the release of DPU. How much do you think it's being influenced by the decision to cut $1 billion in spending from the defense budget? And of course, that's on top of $2.5 billion of lap spending last year, a total of $10 billion that's been lapsed under the defense policy the Liberals came up with 7 years ago. And that's to both of you.
Well, thank you for the question. As I said before, we are very concerned about the defense policy update not coming out, and it's a real opportunity for the government to signify defense as a priority for the country. And not only that, there's a huge opportunity for the defense policy update to also signify the need for an industrial strategy that's there. And again, I think Canada can play a role internationally. We need to step up. And I think the real question is, are we going to take that leadership role or not? And currently, I don't see defense as a priority right now.
So, Ms. Cianfrani, when you take the lack of having a DPU, when you take that there's an absence of a ministerial mandate letter to our new Defense Minister, Bill Blair, what does that say about the priorities of this government when it comes down to defense procurement?
I think what it says is that Canadians don't prioritize national security in the way other countries do. That is the single biggest conclusion that I can draw from the state of defense, both procurement and the Canadian Armed Forces.
So you had mentioned earlier the use of national security exemptions, and I know for a fact that the procurement ombudsman in his report on security exemptions wrote that in Canada, the NSE does not provide for an exception to full and open competition. Procuring bodies would require another reason to limit competition or to sole source of procurement. Do you think the current national security exemptions that we have in place are adequate, or that they need to be updated as well when we're going through this DPU process, or as a committee doing this study right now on procurement?
I suspect there may be some modifications that need to take place. And I know in Canada, sometimes in lieu of national security exception, we use the clause that's called not in the public interest. And this has been used before, but in very limited capacity. So that would probably need to be looked at as well, the use of that and in what conditions.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit here and look at the ITBs, the industrial technical benefits. Do ITBs penalize Canadian industry from bidding on contracts? And does it increase the cost of procurement for the Government of Canada and ultimately for taxpayers?
Me?
Both of you.
Just checking.
Because the aerospace and the overall defense industry is impacted.
So I think there's a lot of confusion around the ITB regime. The ITB regime is a passive way of getting, it's a blunt instrument that is used to be able to get Canadian content or Canadian involvement within a procurement. So by nature, it shouldn't penalize Canadian firms. It should be a way in which we build domestic, we incentivize and build domestic capacity. And by the way, every country does this with its defense market. It is a managed market. We just choose to do it through a very passive tool instead of a more aggressive tool, which is absolute preferencing of your defense contractor prior to even a contract, an acquisition occurring. So I think that...
Mr. Mueller, would you agree with that, or would you say that Canadian companies have to pay, both they're already creating the product here, and then they have to build the ITB as well? So it's meant to originally, because if you're buying out of country, it ensures that there is some industrial benefits secured back in Canada. But a Canadian-based company, aren't they being penalized?
We see some circumstances where some companies are saying that. One of the things about the ITB process is often folks will say that's a strategy. And we keep saying that's not a strategy, that's a tool, and it's an after-the-fact tool. And so we need to take a look at how do we become maybe a little bit more proactive on some of these things? How are we driving the outcomes that make sense for the industry based in Canada across the board?
Thank you, Mr. Bizet. Did you get your extra 7 seconds? And you did get your extra 7 seconds. Mr. Fillmore, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just want to clarify something. I just wanted for the committee to understand. Now, defense spending fell to less than 1% under the previous Conservative government. We've doubled that since that time. In fact, the plan is we've consistently increased the defense spending from $18 billion in 2016-2017. It's going to achieve $40 billion in 2026-27. We're the 7th largest member of NATO. We have the 7th largest to spend on NATO. So I just want to make sure the committee and our guests understand that. But coming back to our panelists, lovely to see you again, and thank you for being with us. I want to turn my mind to ITBs and carry that on. Of course, we know government has many obligations. Defense is one of them, but growing the economy and creating jobs is another one that we take very seriously. And we try to find the confluence of defense procurement and the economy through ITBs. Several witnesses during the study so far have identified that the ITB policy doesn't really succeed in achieving what it's setting out to do, but rather complicates or makes the process less efficient. And here comes Halifax, Mr. Chair. More than a decade ago, I was involved with many others in a advocacy program to win the shipbuilding procurement strategy in Halifax. Today, we've got 2,000 shipbuilders working on the Halifax waterfront. We're heading north to 3,000 as we switch to CSCs. We've managed to bring in training programs for women, for Indigenous shipbuilders, for Black shipbuilders. Clearly, there's an enormous domestic impact that comes through the ITBs. So you both represent large organizations, and I just want to sort of like get a sense of the position, I guess, on whether it's reasonable to continue in some way with the ITB program through an industrial policy, for example. First of all, let's just start with that question. How do you feel about ITBs?
Well, the policy isn't perfect. There's no question about it. But I think with the way in which we look at the defense industry, and we don't start from first principles as we want to have a defense industry in this country, and therefore we will protect it and we will manage it, given we start from almost the diametrically opposed premise, which is, hey, maybe we don't need a defense industry in this country, ITBs are an essential way in which we bring work to Canadian businesses all along the chain. So in some cases, prime contractors are incentivized to partner with Canadian firms, provide jobs in Canada, and I do believe, in absence of other use of other tools in a far more aggressive manner, that the ITB policy is absolutely essential to ensuring that we get work in Canada, where in some circumstances their foreign primes might not be incentivized to do so.
Mr. Miller?
No, I would agree with that analysis. ITB is a tool. Does the tool need a bit of work? Absolutely. We need to become more proactive. We need to identify and maybe remove some of the restrictions with respect to investment in the country. But again, going back, you need that overarching industrial strategy to really drive where we're going to go on some of these things. Absolutely critical. ITB is a good tool to accomplish that, but it's not the strategy overall.
Okay, and defense procurement's a good way as well to grow skills in the workforce, to make Canada more competitive when we procure domestically. Do the ITBs play a role in spurring that innovation as well?
Absolutely, there's a role there. We've had lots of discussions, even with yourself, on the labor market side of things and how do we drive that forward. So any investment into the country, either domestic investment or international investment, is absolutely critical to drive some of those skills forward. And we have amazing companies doing some pretty innovative things on different training mechanisms, and you're seeing industry really taking on a leadership role in some of this respect because we need to.
Okay. Now, if 40 seconds on the industrial strategy that you've mentioned, if you were going to put one or two improvements in there to the ITB program, what specifically might they be?
Proactivity would be number one, and then the identification of the key capacity and capabilities we want to have here in Canada, and then that would drive the ITB
capacity
program
in the workforce.
Could be workforce, could be technology, could be skill sets, could be programs, anything like this. Yes, okay. But we need to have that clear identification, working with the government on some of these things.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Colleagues, we've got some time we've got a 25-minute round coming up, and we've got 15 minutes thereabouts. So if we do 3 minutes, 3 minutes, one and a half, and then 3 minutes, 3 minutes, we will get somewhat close to just after 6 o'clock. So with that, Mr. Bazan, 3 minutes, please.
I just want to give a notice of the following motion, that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on the almost $1 billion cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces and the impact this will have, that the committee hold a minimum of 3 meetings for the study, and that the committee invite President of the Treasury Board, NDDN, Minister of National Defence, Bill Blair, and Chief of Defence Staff, General Wayne Eyre, to appear before the committee for the study, and the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House. That's just notice. So, Ms. Cianfrani, you talked about Canada getting ghosted from AUKUS. And then you went on to talk about the NATO frame contracts that are out there right now on a number of different areas in Canada, again, is not part of that discussion, even though we're a member of NATO. Why are we being ghosted at NATO?
Well, I think it's that we've been in our behavior, and to some extent, from what I've seen reported in the newspapers, the Prime Minister has been very clear with our NATO allies that we have no intention of meeting the obligations that we've signed up to. And I believe that NATO allies have taken that in a very serious way, and their behavior accordingly is that Canada doesn't deserve or isn't going to be a reliable partner on the world stage. That they will take what we are willing to provide, put forward, but that if you need someone to rely upon to meet their commitments, that it isn't going to be Canada.
That is unfortunate. Appreciate your candor. We talk about the U.S. giving Canadian companies military contracts. We know that they often work quite differently than the government of Canada and how they approach it. You know, the RFPs, you know, as was mentioned, we need volumes of documents to satisfy the risk-adverse bureaucracy within the government of Canada, where down the States, 100 pages is usually more than enough, and they'll work side by side with industry to develop new military products. So I'm just wondering what experience Canadian companies are having working with U.S. military that we should be taking as lessons learned to apply to how we procure our own equipment here in Canada.
I think it's tough because we have, I mean, obviously different acquisition rules, and we have, I think, a sort of a narrative in our country that, you know, we compete, fair, open competition, almost at any cost. That is not a mantra that most other countries have. Most other countries start from, as I said, a position of we will preference our domestic industry first and foremost, and then comes the conversation as how do we involve our partners and allies or other nations if we're going to be providing this equipment to the rest of the world. So, you know, we would have to really, first and foremost, change the nature of the way in which we interact with our own industry from first principles. That being said, there are lessons you can learn from the Americans where, you know, and the Australians to some extent, where even before they conceptualize what they're going to make or build or the next airframe, for example, they will already be working in side by side with their industry on what is in the art of the possible. And that becomes usually a research and development project, which then gets funded by firm contracts. So those are some ideas that we could, you know, starting with perhaps our next generation of armored vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Bazan. 3 minutes, Mr. Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and welcome to both witnesses. Last week, former Deputy Minister of Defense Richard Fadden appeared before the committee and talked about, for some of the very large and pricey contracts that we put out, that we might want to look at pushing the pause button on some of our internal controls and purchasing policies that we have in place. What are your thoughts on that suggestion and recommendation?
I don't know exactly to what he was referring. He may have just meant, I truly don't know to which part of the process he was referring to on with regards to internal controls of government, whether that is extra oversight or governance models.
I think he referenced the fact that the process is very slow and cumbersome, I think, as you've both highlighted here today. And so in order to get around that, we might want to look at addressing that with the current regulations that we have in place that make up part of the procurement process. And so in order to gain time in that process, it might mean foregoing some of those internal controls that we have that make up the procurement process.
Well, again, if it's an internal control that potentially can be either combined or omitted, it would be nice to know which ones we're looking at and then determine how eliminating that control, whether it would have ramifications elsewhere, right?
I think it goes a little bit to the recommendation we have about risk-based procurement. So how do you streamline the defense procurement process? How do you reduce some of those unnecessary processes that are there? Again, depending on the risk. And I listened quite attentively to Mr. Fadden on that because it sort of struck my, again, I don't know exactly where he was referring to, but I think that's incumbent upon the government to take a look at how can we streamline these things where the risk is perhaps lower as opposed to that one-size-fits-all procurement solution for everything, which may be a little bit overboard in some respects. So I think there's a nugget there that we should be looking at. But if you're looking, I think for us to say, get rid of that control or this control, I'd be very hesitant to say that. But there is opportunity for improvement.
Very quickly. To the issue of resources, some witnesses have recommended increasing capacity at PSPC. Sorry. CADSI recommendation was very explicit. The words you used, Ms. Cian-Ferrani, was grow the government's workforce.
Mm-hmm.
Is it absolutely necessary to do that in terms of building the bureaucracy, or are there better ways through technological improvements to improve the procurement process?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged approach, right? I mean, you do have to study where there is an overly complex process and eliminate additional steps, redundancies, and other areas.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is fair to say that one of the challenges is maintaining that workforce in order to absorb the volume of procurement that is coming down the pipe, one way or another, whether it is whether it's the current finishing of the Strong, Secure, Engaged, or it is a new, even greater defense policy update.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Madame Vignola, 1.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Rapidement, la question s'adressera.
Thank you very much. My question goes to the two of you. Ms. Cian-Ferrani, for the previous question, I will appreciate if you could send me a written answer. There is no system that is perfect. We understand that. Our procurement system is also not perfect. As far as you know, does government consult industry to find out where there are loopholes, where there are things to improve in the system? If so, how are those consultations carried out? If not, what form should those consultations take?
Generally, we consult with the government on the areas where it overlaps with industry. So, for example, within the procurement process, there is a part that's called industry consultations. They would ask for our feedback on how do you feel the industry consultations happen? How can we improve it? Are there areas where we can, where you don't like it, where we're not getting the right information? But as for the whole process that goes on both within each individual department within government, we are rarely asked to comment on their inner workings, on how, on their inefficiencies within that process.
We do have some, so I would agree, the engagement hasn't been the best in the past, but we do have a defense industry advisory group where we're starting to have these types of discussions on the overall basis and procurement piece. So we're starting to feed into this. There is perhaps a little bit more of a willingness to have these types of discussions. How do you modernize some of the procurement? So we're optimistic about some of those things. Does more work need to be done? Yes. Do we need to see that process evolve and come forward? Absolutely.
Okay, well,
but there is some positive movement there that I've seen.
Thank you. Ms. Madison, 1.5 minutes.
I just want to shift things a little bit, but kind of building, I think, off of some of the answers that I've already heard. You talked about amazing companies innovating, showing leadership, and improving on systems where they can. The Department of National Defense is exempt from the federal government's climate change targets. And I was wondering if you could talk to this committee in terms of that procurement strategy on whether industry is filling that void in themselves, how they're having a bigger impact in terms of climate change, or if they're working together with industries. Is something that you expect out of the update from the defense policy?
Oh, sure. Sure. Yeah, I would say industry is looking at this on its own. It's a big focus of aerospace, in particular, net zero goals, specifically on the civil side, which is good. But again, through defense industrial strategy, through the defense policy update, we would expect to see some signals on how we can contribute to that fight also, which is incredibly important. But again, from an industry perspective, especially on the civil side, Canadian companies are absolute world leaders. And I think with some research and development, there's applications that you can sort of share back and forth, which is good.
Thank you, Ms. Madison. Thank you, Ms. Madison. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, maybe next time you'll get more votes. Who knows? Mr. Kelly. Yeah. 3 minutes, please.
A year ago, the Chief of Defense Staff and Minister Anand said that we must prepare to be on a war footing. Has industry received any other further signals about war footing type procurement?
We have received signals from other nations.
Okay, so that statement was the only one that we got in Canada.
Yeah, we are not on a war footing.
Okay.
Our industry has not been put on a war footing, which you would do through firm government-backed contracts.
Okay, so when Canada was at war in Afghanistan, there were successful, quick procurements for Chinook helicopters, Hercules aircraft, Globemasters, new Leopard tanks, new LAV upgrades. Is the issue of war footing, is that an expedient for procurement?
No, it is the issue that from the top on down, it was make this procurement happen. Okay. So it was a demand and a contract that followed, which procured the equipment that you're talking about.
Okay, so it's simply a matter of
if we want it to happen, it can happen. It will take time for the companies to ramp up to production volume. But if we want it to happen, we need to provide firm contracts for production ramp up.
Okay, and that is entirely on government to do so.
Well, yes, it's not going to come out of the a commercial industry.
No, I know, but we've had testimony, and that's why this is important that we hear this, because when we ask the question about why, it seems we're incredulous that the shell production hasn't been ramped up, and the witnesses we had basically blamed industry.
So the munitions are controlled items. Their munition supply program exists in Canada, and the rate at which we produce, whether it's training rounds or operational rounds, is on a long-term contract with the Government of Canada. To change that rate or to modify that production line will require a change order from the Government of Canada and an acceptance if we are to divert ammunition to another country at volume. It would probably require, correct, and I'm not an expert in this field, but it would most likely require in-depth conversations with the Government of Canada about its own strategic source of supply, right, which means that we cannot do it alone.
Yes, indeed, and yet we've been dithering for a year and a half. The government has not yet done it. So, thank you.
Ms. Lalonde, 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup d'être ici aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much for coming here.
So I was looking at some of the notes that I have here, and I was looking at some of the latest initiatives that the Government of Canada, our government, has made regarding the new F-35 fighter jet. I think my colleague made reference to the warships. We're also looking at our decisions to support Ukraine within, I would say, the best of our ability. I heard many times you talked about and I'll go back to my note, the fact that we need the DPU, but there's a war. And I heard before from other stakeholders that sometimes, and I come from the private sector before entering politics, I understand the significance and the magnitude from your perspective in having fair contracts signed. But is it also a responsibility of the private sector also to look at the possibilities going forward? And sadly, it's very sad that I'm saying this because countries are at war. So I'm looking at this from a private entity aspect. What are you doing to improve that capacity maybe in the long term?
So most certainly, I think it is up to industry to put proposals on the table as to how they can ramp up productions, which, as I understand, these companies have done. There have been proposals submitted to the Government of Canada to increase production that require anything from line changes to agreements on production volumes to backstopping it, because governments are our only customer with respect to munitions supply.
Yeah, that's control.
Right? Mm-hmm. We also need to understand that other countries are positioning their industry to do these, to make these volume productions. So, for example, France is not going to buy from Canada if it can produce munitions in that order of magnitude. It understands that it will be an investment in its own industrial base to do so, and then provide those munitions to Ukraine, as an example. France is not going to come to Canada unless the Canadian government steps forward and says, we have a source of supply that we are willing to share with our NATO partners and Ukraine, and we are willing to backstop getting that up to production rate and diverting our volumes, our operational volumes, to another country, to multiple other countries for that matter. Because the volume of the product that would be required would be significantly historical highs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for this. I may have a minute left.
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much.
That does bring our session. Thank you, colleagues, for your cooperation in maintaining some time discipline. Ms. Cianfrani and Mr. Mueller, thank you for your testimony. And I'm very pleased that you were able to adjust your schedules in order to be able to be here to accommodate our unique day, shall we say. And with that, colleagues, I just remind you, next Thursday, it's one panel for 2 hours of the various representatives of the 4 governments for the next Thursday. With that, meeting adjourned.